Cornel, it's such a joy to be with you here at the American Enterprise Institute in their wonderful new building. The lead gift for the building was given by Mr. Dan Daniello, who's a great supporter of AEI and of good public policy initiatives and of intellectual life, so we wanted to pay tribute to him. Such a delight to be with Arthur Brooks, the president of AEI.
It's nice to meet you.
Someone thinks about many of the same issues that we think about, the importance of human dignity and of founding economic and public policy initiatives on the principle of human dignity. And it's always so great to be together with you, where we can continue this wonderful dialogue that we've been carrying on in friendship.
You said it's almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years. 2007 was the first time that
the other day.
we taught together. Next year will be our 10th anniversary, my brother.
Now, when Andrew brought us together, was that 2006, you think?
Yeah, it must have been 2006.
When we first had that.
Andrew Perlmutter was a student in the religion department.
Yes,
He had worked with you in one or two of your courses. He'd had one or two of my courses, and he was starting a new magazine, campus magazine.
Green Light.
The Green Light.
It came from F. Scott Fitzgerald.
I think
the great
that's right.
Gatsby.
Yeah, I think that very appropriate for Princeton.
Oh, yes, yes.
And one of the features of the magazine was going to be an interview of one professor by another professor. And so for the inaugural issue, they invited you to be the interviewer, and they gave you the right to pick who your interview subject would be. And you did me the honor. We didn't even know each other very well. You did me the honor of picking me as your interview subject. I remember Andrew coming knocking on the door and saying, "Professor George, would you be willing to be interviewed by Professor West?" And of course I said, well, I'd be very honored to be interviewed by Professor West. And so I remember the occasion when you came together with Andrew. He had a tape recorder, one of those old-fashioned cassette tape recorders. That'd be an antique today. And he had a photographer with him. And I think we were supposed to talk for an hour, and we ended up talking for 4 hours. And then I said, I have to go have dinner. My wife Cindy's going to be waiting for me, wondering what happened to me. And you walked me down to my car, where I held my hand on the car latch for about another half hour.
Another 30-minute
while we kept going at it.
I do recall. I said, no, I think we've got something special here, though, because there's no doubt our spirits and our souls resonated. And intellectually, we were just on fire talking about the great classical and canonical texts. And
that's when we decided to teach together.
We figured, we've got to teach a class together, a great books class.
Yeah.
From Plato through Newman all the way up to Martin Luther King Jr.
I remember that very well. For the first class, you chose 6 books and I chose 6 books, and we decided that we would each choose books that were important in our own intellectual odyssey. And then after that, we just chose all the books together for the future seminars that we taught.
Well,
almost 10 years. Yeah, almost 10 years. Do you remember some of the authors from the very first one? Of course, we had Plato's Gorgias.
We always started with Plato.
That text, the Gorgias, had been very important for me in my intellectual journey. That's what opened my mind to philosophy when I was an undergraduate at Swarthmore. You recommended Luther's Babylonian Captivity of the Church, which I had never read.
I forgot.
Yeah, and only when I read it did I finally understand how one man, an obscure monk, could turn the whole of Christian civilization in Europe on its head and cause a revolution, a reformation, because it is such a powerful polemic. Of course, as a Catholic, I needed to hear that. Now we're celebrating the 500th anniversary of I don't know if I'm celebrating, but it's the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. But you introduced me to that text, and that shed a lot of light on the history of Christian civilization in the West and how the Reformation actually happened. Let's see, what else did we read? We read Hayek and we read Marx.
Hayek and Marx.
We read Marx' Communist Manifesto.
We insisted on reading both.
That's exactly right. And I remember one of the books you chose was Leo Strauss' Natural Right and History.
Oh, yes.
That's right. Now, people would be surprised about that because they think, Cornel West, he's a big leftist. He's going to hate Leo Strauss. Why would he insist on reading Leo Strauss? But what people don't know about you, my brother, is that you've got a deep appreciation of the conservative tradition. Leo Strauss,
Eric Voegelin,
Burke.
Edmund Burke.
Yeah, I'm outing you now in front of all these people.
No, I tell the world. I tell the world.
Yeah.
But you insisted on Martin Luther King Jr.
I did, because I'd been teaching Letter from the Birmingham Jail, and it was a very important text for me. And of course, it's important to the history of the Civil Rights Movement, but it's actually a work of political philosophy, one that draws on many of the other works that we were reading. It draws on St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. It's an explication at a popular level. It wasn't just for scholars, an explication of the tradition of natural law. And as you know, I've devoted my career to the idea of natural law theory, which goes back through the Middle Ages and the Christian period, back all the way to Plato and Aristotle and to the Roman philosophers and jurists. So King is a kind of synthesizer and summarizer in the context of the civil rights struggle of these treasures of civilization that give us reason to believe that there are standards above the merely human law, moral standards, principles of natural law, under which the human law always stands in judgment.
Absolutely.
That's how we can judge human law to be good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust. If it weren't for those standards, as King points out, then there would be no saying that Hitler was wrong or Hitler was bad, or that Mother Teresa is good.
That's right.
We'd be left in a kind of swamp of relativism and ultimately nihilism.
You know, one of the things that we have been able to experience together is the awakening and coming alive of the minds, hearts, and souls of the students.
Oh, that's the joy.
Freshmen,
that's the joy of
juniors,
teaching.
the seniors, the sophomores. But also, I get a chance to observe you in the classroom as such a masterful teacher, weaving these ideas and arguments. I mean, you reflect on the Communist Manifesto, and the students wonder, we thought Professor George was conservative. Oh, no, the critique is there, but let's put forward the strongest version of the argument that you see in this text.
Well, right back at you, brother, because you do exactly the same thing.
I tried to.
That's right, and I think that's what teachers ought to be doing. When we approach an important text, whether we agree with it or we don't agree with it, the first thing we should be asking is what is to be learned from the mind behind that text. I think about that with Nietzsche all the time. Nietzsche haunts me.
Yes, and for good reason.
Because I deeply, profoundly disagree with him, and yet I recognize the power of his intellect and the power of his arguments, and I know I'm not entitled to my position until I have a good answer for Nietzsche. So in reading Marx, I want to present it in its most favorable light, even though I reject it utterly. But we did it, I think, the way you should do it, and we always do it the way you should do it. We presented Marx, but we also presented Hayek.
Oh, yes.
So students got to see both positions. You know, the profound critique of communism that you have in Hayek, along with the case being made for communism by Marx himself, or Marx and Engels in that case, in the Communist Manifesto.
Absolutely. You know, I think one of the things that brings us together is this fundamental commitment to looking at the world through spiritual and moral lens.
Yeah.
So that even the disagreements about policies or politicians and so forth, that I think in the end there is a deep similarity in terms of our commitment to the least of these, a commitment to the orphan and the widow and fatherless and motherless and poor.
We're both deeply rooted in the prophetic tradition of Judaism, and of course, we're fellow Christians. And so, of course, the first question we always want to ask about, for example, a policy is what will be the impact on the poorest, the weakest, the most vulnerable members of the community. Now, conservatives and people on the left would have different policy prescriptions, but they're fundamentally about means and not about ends. If you believe in the principle of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The other thing we recognize, and this was pointed out in the dialogue we did this morning for the American Enterprise Institute, the public dialogue that we did, I think I noted that Camus, to take an example of someone who was not a Christian, who was not a theist, was not a believer, nevertheless recognized that the project and challenge of leading a human life was fundamentally a spiritual project and challenge.
Absolutely.
It was a search for meaning, a search for transcendence. Camus, although not a believer, was willing to engage the great existential questions because he knew that the human person was not reducible to merely material things or mere appetites or feelings or emotions. He recognized a spiritual element of the human being that could never simply rest, but was always reaching out for something transcendent, something beyond. He didn't find it in the God of classical theism where I would find it and where you find it, we as Christians. But nevertheless, he knew that that's what the quest was. He knew that the quest was a quest for.
And it's fascinating because you and I had no idea that 10 years later, we would be living in the age of Trump.
Yeah, that's for sure.
No idea, you know. And so on the one hand, you figure, okay, in the Republican Party, you got a number of candidates. And, you know, you make your choices. Democratic Party, you got a number of candidates, you make your choices. You and I chose candidates that didn't win in the primary. And then we had to choose, are we going with the two candidates that, in our view, don't meet the criteria of integrity?
We were in the same position because the question was, did Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, either one, reach the threshold of decency and integrity required to be president of the United States? And I'm sure you were under the same pressure that I was under. You as a former Bernie Sanders supporter, me as a former Ted Cruz supporter.
That's right.
We were under the same pressure to go along, to join the team, to conform, and we were under the same threats. If you don't, you'll be an outsider.
That's true.
If you don't, you're excommunicated from the movement, from the club. And yet,
and I was not
surprised.
I was not surprised when you stood your ground.
Yeah, as you did as well.
You stood your ground.
As you did as well.
You know,
of course, now you've been doing it for years as a critic from the left of the Obama administration. I know that you were under tremendous pressure and criticism for not going along with Obama, for your willingness to criticize publicly the first black American president. But you were willing to do it, even though you knew that it meant you weren't going to get invitations to the White House, you were not going to be an insider, you weren't going to have the status that you might otherwise have enjoyed, you weren't going to be on MSNBC every night and all that stuff.
And you would have done the same thing to the
first
first president.
I'd like to think I would have.
West Virginia, first Catholic,
yeah.
or whatever,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's a matter, I mean, we're fallible and finite and fallen, so we fall on our faces, but we really try to the best of our ability, and this is when we help each other in this regard, to try to sustain our quest for integrity, honesty, and decency. And it's a precious quest, and it's not pure, it's not pristine, but it has much to do with how we were raised. It has much to do with the choices we make in terms of our religious Christian faith. It has something to do with the traditions that we choose to be a part of. And also how we choose to die, that we intend to be faithful unto death.
That's what it's all about. Think of just how precious integrity is. And this I try to impart to our young people. I know you do as well. Everything else can be taken from us. Our material possessions can be taken from us. Our liberty can be taken, and we can be thrown in jail. I was wondering whether they're keeping Guantanamo open for the two of us. Whoever won the election might have wanted to take advantage of Guantanamo. They can take away your standing in society. All of these things, all of these goods can be taken away. The one thing that nobody can take away from you is your integrity. The only way you lose it is if you give it up by your free choices and actions, because you value wealth or power or status or prestige or influence more than you value your integrity. That's why I say that the worst form of slavery, the most abject form of slavery, is slavery to self. It's to be under the control of your desires and feelings and emotions and unable to control them. The physical slave is in a terrible, unjust condition. His freedom has been taken away. His family may be separated, sold down the river. His material possessions are not even his material possessions, but he can still have his integrity, because no master, no tyrant can take that internal thing away from you, but you can give it up. And you cannot be in slavery. You can be rich, you can be powerful, you can be respected, and yet have no integrity because you gave up your integrity. And it's such a precious thing. It can't be given up for anything.
And that's a message that is more relevant now than ever.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because the incentives to give up your integrity are very powerful.
Very powerful.
We want to be somebody. We want to be respected. We want to be admired. We want to be ahead, part of the in crowd. So the pressure to conform even where conforming means abandoning integrity,
That's exactly
is
right.
very powerful.
That's
And I think the
exactly
pressure on young people is the worst.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they're
yeah.
barely formed. They're barely adults, and this pressure is bearing down on them to conform in order to get ahead, to stay part of the in crowd, to be regarded as sophisticated. But of course, we as Christians, we have the example of Jesus,
Oh, yeah.
who told us if we want to be his followers, you know, don't expect power and influence and wealth and prestige and
Right.
status.
Pick up your cross. and
Take up your
follow.
cross and follow me.
No, that's very
It wasn't
real.
supposed to be easy.
That's very real. And those examples make a difference, though. When you think of those in our own life, I have been blessed to meet your father, your family, and they are exemplars of integrity. So I can part see from whence you come, but then you chose to follow that trajectory. You could have chosen something else.
Examples are important. You've had them in your life with your father and your mother,
Oh, yes.
Clifton and Irene.
Absolutely.
We've all had them in terms of figures like Dorothy Day, who both of us
Oh, yes.
admire.
Towering figure.
Yeah.
Towering figure.
We rely on that. I mean, I think this is why saints are important in the Christian faith. They're exemplars. They're
grand
not
exemplars.
perfect.
No,
they're
no,
not, they're
no,
not
no,
perfect.
no,
They're
no.
made of flesh and blood the way we are. Stain of original sin just the way
That's
we are.
right.
I mean, think of
That's
the
right.
11 of the 12 apostles when Jesus was being tried and persecuted and crucified. They fled.
They fled.
They fled. Peter was warming his hands in front of the fire, and the servant girl says, "Surely you're one of this man's disciples." And he said, "Oh, I don't even know the man."
Didn't know him, didn't know him.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
you're right.
like all of us, they fell, but then they got up and dusted themselves back off. They might have fallen again. They get up and try again. Fail, try again. Fail,
Fail.
try again.
Samuel
try.
Baker, try again, fail again, fail better. Try again, fail again, fail. And he's a lapsed Protestant Christian and a Catholic.
But the role models
country
are
and
terribly,
island,
terribly important.
But they make a difference. They really. It's one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk too much about upstairs was I was going to invoke Emerson and his representative men text, and just representative persons, what it means to be an exemplar. I know Brother Jeff Stoughton has been thinking much about this, again, for his building, for his Gifford lectures.
Yeah.
You know,
And of course, Al Raboteau, our friend and colleague Al Raboteau, has a book
The American Prophets.
on prophets, on American
Powerful
prophets.
text.
Yeah.
In fact, they are meeting today.
Oh, are
Al
they really?
Roberts, Jeff Stout, Eddie Glaude.
Oh.
And he said, "You must come, Brother West." I said, "No, I'm with my brother Robbie at the AEI. I'm going to miss that." But the same issue.
Yeah.
How do we come to terms with these exemplars of high quality, of spirit, mind, intellect, courage in our own times?
Yeah, this is one of the problems that I saw with our young people with Clinton and Trump, because they were bad role models.
They're just not good.
No,
good
I wish
examples.
President Trump the best. I mean, he is now our president.
No, it's
we have to
true.
wish,
Yeah,
that he seeks good ends and that he succeeds. And I think we need to be prepared to help him if he's prepared
moving in the right direction
in
and
the right
so forth.
direction. And yet, the model, the example that was set, the lying by both of them, the dissimulation, the deception, the
It's
terrible
true.
things that Trump said about women and Muslims and John McCain.
Mexicans, what he said about
Carly,
John McCain.
Carly Fiorina.
Even Ted Cruz, what he said about Ted
What he
Cruz,
said
his
about
father.
Ted Cruz's father. Yeah. But I don't want to beat up. I mean, he's our president
No,
now,
but I
and I
mean,
hope he's
we'll
reformed.
see.
But the
And
example, if
we'll see.
if people like this get ahead, that sets an example for young people about how you get ahead. It was always terrible about the Bill Clinton administration. It would have been terrible about a Hillary Clinton administration. I fear it's going to be terrible about a Trump administration. So what young people need is good role models, models of integrity, of self-sacrifice, of decency.
Exactly. And that's part of what we were talking about upstairs, about the spiritual blackout.
You should say more about that.
You know, what it really means to live in a culture is experiencing the relative eclipse of integrity, honesty, and decency, in which the rule of money, especially big money, carries with it an attendant culture of cupidity, which is love of money, of mendacity, you can lie and do anything you want to gain access to money, and venality, in which you sell your soul for a mess of pottage for money. And that culture now is seeping in every nook and cranny of our souls, and especially the souls of our precious young people. And that kind of soul craft of smartness and dollars rather than wisdom and justice is very dangerous. I don't think a democratic experiment can survive based on that kind of soul craft.
I think there is a very deep spiritual problem here, but I think it goes deeper than desire for money. I think it's the desire for the sort of thing that money gives you in a society like ours: influence, status, prestige, being somebody, counting, being important. Most people I know, even those who are too occupied with getting money, and there's nothing wrong in itself with getting money. I mean, you know, what would we do without it? We have responsibilities, we have family responsibilities, and many people. This is a country in which so many philanthropists have done so many great things with money. We have reason for great gratitude.
Gates family and others have made
many. We were praising Dan Daniello this morning for the great building that he gave to AEI. But I think the problem is people needing to feel as though they matter, needing to feel that they're important, not understanding that your importance doesn't have to do with how much influence you have or what your social status is. The spiritual danger here is nihilism. It's imagining that unless we gain the status, the prestige, the influence that people now strive so much for, and that money sometimes brings, or sometimes obtainable in other ways, including by cheating, or by lying, or by deceiving, then we are just nobody. We don't count, that there's nothing else there. There's a lack of appreciation of the inherent dignity of the person. Appreciation by the person himself of his own dignity, and his appreciation of the dignity, the inherent dignity of other people.
Of the other people too. And that is profound spiritual and moral crisis.
Right.
Profound.
Well, Cornel, we're going to have to wrap up our conversation. We got to get you on the road back up to New
stuff
York.
Like always, my brother.
Oh, yes. It's so wonderful to be with you. God bless you.
Almighty, though.
Let's keep it up.
We will until death.
Amen.
That's what